The flames had long since died, but the whispers never did. Emma Mitchell saved 12 children from a burning schoolhouse, emerging with half her face forever changed, and suddenly, the woman once considered the heart of Willow Creek became someone people couldn't bear to look at. Unmarriageable, they called her behind closed doors and open fans. Such a tragedy, they'd say, eyes averted from her scarred cheek. But in the Montana Territory of 1885, one man would see what others couldn't. Beneath her scars lay a courage that would awaken his own silent heart. This is the story of how two broken souls found wholeness in each other when an entire town tried to keep them apart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1885, in the rugged embrace of Montana Territory. Willow Creek wasn't just a town, it was a hierarchy, a carefully ordered society where everyone understood their place. At its pinnacle stood the Winters family, whose timber fortune had built half the buildings on Main Street, and whose matriarch, Margaret Winters, ruled the social order with a velvet-gloved iron fist. From her Victorian mansion on the hill, Margaret held court over reputations and relationships alike, her influence stretching across the valley like the long shadow of the mountains themselves. Spring had come early that year, bringing with it the promise of renewal. But for Emma Mitchell, seasons changed while expectations didn't. 2 years had passed since the schoolhouse fire, 2 years since she'd run back into the burning building when the headcount came up short. 12 children. Saved, 12 families eternally grateful. And yet gratitude had a short memory in Willow Creek. What remained instead were the scars, angry red marks that twisted down the left side of her face and neck, disappearing beneath her high-collared dress, only to emerge again on her left hand and arm. The physical pain had eventually subsided, the social exile had not. That April morning, Emma stood in her garden, coaxing early seedlings from the soil with gentle fingers. Her small cottage at the edge of town had become both sanctuary and prison, a place where she could exist without facing the awkward glances and sudden silences that followed her in town. The garden had started as therapy, a way to reconnect with living things that didn't judge. Now, it fed half the struggling families in Willow Creek, though few would acknowledge where the vegetables on their tables had originated. "Miss Mitchell, Miss Mitchell!" The familiar voices of children broke through her solitude. Emma straightened, brushing soil from her good hand as 3 young siblings came running down the path to her gate. The Watson children, Mary, Thomas, and little Sarah, had been among those she'd saved from the fire. Unlike their parents, they visited without reservation or discomfort. "Good morning," Emma called, her scarred cheek lifting in a smile that had once been considered pretty. "Aren't you supposed to be in school?" "Teacher sent us home," Thomas announced, his 8-year-old face serious. "Said we were disrupting class because we couldn't read the passage." Emma's brow furrowed. "Again? That's the 3rd time this month." "Pa says it doesn't matter," Mary added, swinging on the gate. "Says we'll work the farm anyway, don't need fancy reading." Something inside Emma, the teacher she'd once been, the teacher she still was at heart, kindled with familiar determination. "Nonsense. Every mind deserves nurturing, just like these seeds," she gestured to her garden. "Would you like to learn here instead? I could set up lessons in the afternoons." The children's enthusiastic response warmed her more than the spring sunshine. It wasn't until they'd left, promise of books and lessons secured, that Emma realized what she'd set in motion. Teaching again, even informally, would put her back in the town's consciousness, back in Margaret Winters' sights. Emma's hand rose unconsciously to her scarred cheek. 2 years of carefully constructed withdrawal would end. But perhaps it was time to reclaim something of the woman she'd been before the fire had rewritten her story. With renewed purpose, Emma gathered her shawl and market basket. If she was to teach again, even just 3 eager children in her garden, she would need supplies. That meant facing Willow Creek's main street, its curious eyes and whispered judgments. Squaring her shoulders, she walked the dirt path toward town, mentally rehearsing the errands, paper and pencils from the general store, perhaps a visit to Abigail's bookshop for appropriate reading materials. Willow Creek's main street bustled with the usual Tuesday activities. Wagons loaded with timber from the winter's mill rumbled past, shopkeepers swept their boardwalks, and ladies clustered in conversational knots that seemed to loosen and tighten as Emma approached. Once, she had been part of those circles, the respected school teacher whose opinion was sought on matters educational and cultural. Now those same women found sudden interest in shop windows or drifting clouds when she drew near. The general store bell jingled as Emma entered, the familiar scent of coffee beans and leather goods enveloping her. Old Mr. Patterson glanced up from his ledger, his initial smile faltering before recovering professionally. "Miss Mitchell, been some time since we've seen you in town." "Good morning, Mr. Patterson." Emma kept her voice steady, projecting the confidence she'd once naturally possessed. "I find myself in need of school supplies. Pencils, paper, perhaps a slate if you have one." His bushy eyebrows rose. "School supplies? Thought you were done with teaching after." His eyes flickered to her scarred cheek before dropping away. "After I survived?" Emma finished quietly. "The fire took many things, Mr. Patterson, but not my ability to educate." The storekeeper had the grace to look abashed as he gathered her requested items. Emma was reaching for her coin purse when the bell above the door jingled again. The sudden hush that fell over the store made her aware of the newcomer before she turned. Nathan Hayes stood just inside the doorway, his tall frame nearly touching the hanging lanterns. The owner of Evergreen Ranch rarely came to town, and when he did, he kept his business brief and his interactions briefer. Since returning from the war 3 years earlier, the once gregarious son of one of Montana's pioneering families had become as much legend as man, spoken of in Willow Creek, but seldom spoken to. "Hayes," Patterson nodded respectfully. "Your order came in yesterday. Got it all packed up for you." Nathan merely nodded, his gaze sweeping the store in the careful assessment of a man accustomed to watching for threats. When his eyes reached Emma, they paused, not with the usual flicker of discomfort she'd grown accustomed to, but with simple recognition. His steady look caused Emma to turn instinctively, presenting her unscarred right profile, a habit developed over 2 years of social defense. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice lower and rougher than she remembered from before the war. Before her accident, they had never been properly introduced, but in a town the size of Willow Creek, everyone knew everyone, at least by name and story. "Mr. Hayes," she replied with a slight nod. Surprised he had addressed her at all, an awkward silence followed, broken only when Patterson cleared his throat. "That'll be 75 cents for the supplies, Miss Mitchell." As Emma counted out her coins, she was acutely aware of Nathan Hayes moving to the counter beside her, examining the parcel Patterson had prepared. His presence seemed to fill the small store, not with the brash energy of the cowboys who occasionally rode into town, but with a contained intensity that drew attention despite his obvious desire to avoid it. "Will there be anything else, Miss Mitchell?" Patterson asked, handing over her wrapped purchases. "No, thank you." Emma turned to leave, careful to maintain distance between herself and Nathan Hayes. Social protocols in Willow Creek had rearranged themselves after her injury. People gave her a wider berth, as though scars might be contagious. She was nearly to the door when a deep voice stopped her. "You're teaching again?" Emma turned, surprised to find Nathan Hayes looking at her with what appeared to be genuine curiosity, the wrapped school supplies in her arms having drawn his attention. "Informally," she clarified, "just a few children who need extra help." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. My foreman's sons could use schooling. Pete Watson's boys can't read a lick despite a year in the new school. Emma blinked in surprise. The Watson children are precisely who I'm starting with tomorrow. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. Good. Pete's a fine horseman, but no scholar. Boys deserve better than repeating his limitations. Before Emma could respond, the store's bell jangled again as Samuel Winters swept in, bringing with him the entitled air that only the nephew of Willow Creek's most influential citizen could cultivate. His fine suit and carefully waxed mustache seemed almost absurdly out of place against the practical goods of Patterson's store. "Hayes," Samuel said, his tone overly cordial. "Thought that was your horse outside? Fortuitous meeting? I was planning to ride out to Evergreen this week to discuss my offer for your North Pasture water rights." Nathan's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Save yourself the ride, Winters. Answer's still no." Samuel's practiced smile remained fixed. Now surely we can discuss this like businessmen. My aunt is hosting a dinner on Friday for some investors from Helena. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She specifically requested your presence. Not interested. Nathan turned back to Patterson. Add 50 pounds of coffee to my order. I'll send a wagon tomorrow. Samuel's gaze slid to Emma, standing forgotten near the door. Unlike Nathan's direct look, Samuel's eyes darted away from her scars immediately, focusing somewhere above her left shoulder. "Miss Mitchell, unusual to see you in town." "Mr. Winters." Emma nodded coolly. Samuel had been among her students years ago, before being sent to boarding school in the East. He had returned a man who behaved as though Willow Creek existed solely to advance his ambitions. "I heard you were planning some sort of home-school arrangement," Samuel continued, his tone suggesting the idea was mildly distasteful. "Aunt Margaret mentioned concerns about whether that's appropriate, given the circumstances." The familiar flush of humiliation threatened to rise in Emma's cheeks. The circumstances of children needing education that they're not receiving? Those circumstances, Mr. Winters. Samuel's smile tightened. "I merely meant that the school board has appointed qualified teachers. Private arrangements might undermine their authority." "The Watson boys have been sent home 3 times this month," Nathan interjected unexpectedly. "School's failing them, not the other way around." Emma glanced at him, surprised by the alliance. Samuel's face registered similar shock before recovering his composure. "Well, I'm sure Aunt Margaret would be happy to address any educational concerns at the next town council meeting." Samuel straightened his already impeccable cuffs. "She takes a special interest in the welfare of all Willow Creek citizens, especially those facing difficulties." The veiled reference to her scars hung in the air like a slap. Emma had endured 2 years of such subtle cruelties, each one designed to remind her of the social boundaries her disfigurement had created. Usually, she weathered them with stoic dignity, but something about Samuel's smug certainty, combined with the unexpected presence of Nathan Hayes, sparked a dormant defiance. "How thoughtful of Mrs. Winters," Emma replied evenly. "Please do tell her that I'm available to discuss educational methods anytime. As the only formally trained teacher currently in Willow Creek, I'm sure my experience would be valuable to the council." Samuel's smile faltered, clearly not having expected resistance. "I'll mention your offer. You do that." Emma nodded to both men and walked out, her heart pounding with a strange mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. For 2 years, she had carefully avoided confrontation, accepting her diminished place in Willow Creek's social order. Today, something had shifted. The bright afternoon sunlight momentarily blinded her as she stepped onto the boardwalk. Emma paused, adjusting her shawl to better shield her scarred side from public view, another habit born of too many horrified glances. She was deliberating whether to risk a visit to Abigail's bookshop when the store door opened behind her. "Miss Mitchell," Nathan Hayes' voice drew her attention. "A moment." Emma turned, instinctively angling her good side toward him. The tall rancher stood a respectful distance away, his expression unreadable beneath his weather-worn hat. Up close, he was younger than town gossip suggested, perhaps mid-30s, though the war and ranch life had weathered his face into something more seasoned. The solitude he was rumored to prefer had left its mark in the careful way he held himself, as if constantly maintaining invisible boundaries. "Mr. Hayes," she prompted when he didn't immediately continue. "The Watson boys," he said finally. "If you're teaching them, would you consider taking on a few more children from the ranch? The Hands families, 5 or 6 kids altogether?" The request was so unexpected that Emma momentarily forgot her usual self-consciousness. "You want me to teach the ranch children? They need schooling. Town's too far for daily trips." His direct gaze never wavered from her face, never dipped awkwardly to her scars the way most people's did. "I can arrange transportation to your place. Pay you properly for your time." The offer stirred something that had been dormant in Emma for too long. Professional purpose, the identity she'd lost along with her unblemished face. Yet wariness tempered her response. "Mrs. Winters clearly has reservations about my teaching." A flash of something hard crossed Nathan's features. "Margaret Winters doesn't dictate what happens at Evergreen Ranch. She influences most everything else in Willow Creek," Emma pointed out. "Not everything," he countered. "Not everyone." The quiet assertion held a weight that suggested personal experience with resisting Margaret Winters' influence. Emma studied him, wondering at the story behind his words. The reclusive rancher was something of an enigma in town, respected for his success with Evergreen Ranch, but viewed with a mixture of curiosity and wariness for his withdrawal from society after returning from the war. "Why me?" she asked finally. "There must be others who could teach your ranch children, others without complications." Nathan Hayes looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. Her whole face, scars included. "The children who were in that fire still talk about you. How you went back in for the ones trapped upstairs. How you covered them with your own body when the roof beam fell." His voice remained level, matter of fact. "Seems to me someone with that kind of courage is exactly who should be teaching children." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment. For 2 years, the fire had defined her by what it had taken. Nathan Hayes was the first person to suggest it might also have revealed something worth honoring. "I'll need to see what materials they require," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Each child will have different needs." He nodded once, accepting her implicit agreement. "I'll bring them by your place Thursday afternoon, if that suits. See where they stand with their learning." "Thursday," Emma confirmed, still slightly dazed by the unexpected turn of events. "Around 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock, he echoed, touching the brim of his hat in a brief gesture of respect before turning away. Emma watched him stride down the boardwalk, his purposeful movements attracting glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing the reclusive rancher engaged in conversation. Only when he'd mounted his horse and ridden away did she notice Abigail Carter watching from the doorway of her bookshop across the street, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. "Emma Mitchell," Abigail called, beckoning her friend over with an urgent wave. "What in heaven's name was that about?" Emma crossed the dusty street, clutching her package of school supplies. "Apparently I'm to start teaching again, not just the Watson children, but ranch children from Evergreen as well." Abigail's eyes widened as she ushered Emma into the quiet sanctuary of her bookshop, the bell tinkling softly as the door closed behind them. the familiar smell of paper and leather, bindings wrapped around Emma like a comforting embrace. Next to her garden, Abigail's shop had become her favorite refuge in the past 2 years, one of the few places where she was treated with unchanging kindness. "Nathan Hayes spoke to you, voluntarily." Abigail's whisper held awe tinged with scandal. The man barely exchanges 10 words with most people, and those are usually yes, no, and good day. He was direct, Emma acknowledged, setting her package on Abigail's counter, and surprisingly observant about the Watson boys' difficulties at school. "Well, I'm not surprised he noticed," Abigail said, arranging a display of penny dreadfuls. The Hayes family has always valued education. His mother, Clara, was one of the first school teachers in the territory before she married old Joseph Hayes. Emma absorbed this information with interest. His mother was a teacher, one of the best from all accounts. Still lives at the ranch, though her health is poor these days. Abigail paused, studying her friend with shrewd eyes. "Margaret Winters will have opinions about this arrangement, you know." "Margaret Winters has opinions about everything," Emma replied, with a hint of the spirit that had characterized her before the fire. "Samuel made that abundantly clear at Patterson's just now." Abigail grimaced. "Samuel was there too? What? A charming encounter for you?" "Actually," Emma said slowly, "it was. Clarifying. Standing between those 2 men, one who couldn't bear to look at me directly, and one who did so without a single flinch, I realized something." "What's that?" Emma's fingers unconsciously rose to trace the ridge of scar tissue along her jawline. "That I've allowed others to decide what my scars mean, what they say about my value, my place in this town." She met her friend's gaze steadily. "I think it's time I reclaimed that narrative for myself." Abigail's expression softened with a mixture of pride and concern. "Good for you, Emma. Just be careful. The Winters family doesn't take kindly to people who defy their vision of proper order." "I'm teaching children to read, not leading a rebellion," Emma pointed out with a small smile. "In Margaret Winters' world, those might be the same thing." Abigail moved to her shelves, selecting several books with practiced efficiency. "Now, if you're teaching again, you'll need proper materials. I've been saving these for you, readers graded by difficulty, a mathematics primer, and some illustrated natural history." As Abigail assembled a stack of books, Emma felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in 2 years: anticipation. The chance to teach again, to reclaim part of her former self, beckoned like a distant light, and perhaps most surprising of all was the source of this opportunity, the reclusive rancher who looked at her scars without flinching. Thursday afternoon would mark either the beginning of something meaningful or another painful reminder of all she had lost. Either way, Emma Mitchell was suddenly, unexpectedly ready to find out. Emma waited for Nathan's answer, acutely aware they were drawing curious glances from passers-by on the boardwalk. For a man known to avoid conversation, he seemed surprisingly deliberate in choosing his words. "I've seen how education changes lives," he finally said. "My mother taught in mining camps before marrying my father. She'd say the right teacher matters more than fancy buildings or town approval." His gaze remained steady. "The Watson children speak highly of you. That's recommendation enough." There was something refreshing about his directness that cut through Emma's carefully constructed defenses. After 2 years of pitying looks and careful euphemisms, Nathan Hayes' straightforward manner felt like cool water in drought. "Thursday. At 2 then," she confirmed. "I'll prepare assessments to determine their levels." He nodded once, touching his hat brim in farewell, before striding toward his waiting horse. Emma watched him mount with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle, then turned toward Abigail's bookshop, conscious of the whispers that had already begun behind her. Abigail was arranging a window display when Emma entered. The small bell above the door announcing her arrival. Her friend's eyebrows rose in surprise. Twice in town in one day? This is unexpected. Abigail's gaze drifted to the street outside, though perhaps less surprising after what I just witnessed. Emma set her package of school supplies on the counter. It wasn't planned. Mr. Hayes asked me to teach the children at Evergreen Ranch. Nathan Hayes initiated a conversation. Abigail abandoned her display to join Emma at the counter. The man who declined to speak at his own father's funeral, who communicates with his ranch hands primarily through nods and hand signals. He was perfectly articulate, Emma defended, then paused. Is he truly that reclusive? Since returning from the war, absolutely. Abigail lowered her voice, though they were alone in the shop. They say he watched his younger brother die at Gettysburg, came back changed, spoke only when necessary. Folks respected Joseph Hayes enough to give Nathan space, but there's been talk lately about his fitness to manage such a large operation. Led by Margaret Winters, no doubt, Emma murmured. Her nephew seems quite interested in the ranch's water rights. The Winters family has been trying to expand their timber operations into ranching for years, Abigail confirmed. Samuel recently returned from business school with grand plans that require more water than they control. Emma considered this information thoughtfully, so my teaching arrangement might be viewed as more than educational charity. In Willow Creek, everything connects to power eventually. Abigail began selecting books from her shelves. Now, if you're to teach a mixed-age group, you'll need appropriate materials. These readers are graded by difficulty. As Abigail assembled a stack of books, Emma found herself reflecting on Nathan Hayes's unexpected offer. Was it merely about education for the ranch children, or was there something more, perhaps a small rebellion against Margaret Winter's influence? Either way, it represented something Emma hadn't dared hope for, a chance to reclaim part of her former identity. I can't pay for all these, Emma protested when she saw the growing pile. Consider it an investment in Willow Creek's future, Abigail replied firmly. Besides, half these books have been gathering dust since the new schoolhouse opened with its modern curriculum. The walk home gave Emma time to process the day's events. Her small cottage appeared before her just as the afternoon light began to soften, its modest garden and whitewashed walls representing both her diminished circumstances and her resilience. Once, she had boarded with the mayor's family as befitted, the town's teacher. Now this cottage on the outskirts was both exile and sanctuary. Emma spent the evening reviewing her old teaching notes, long stored in a trunk she hadn't opened since the fire. Her fingers traced lesson plans and student assessments, memories flooding back with each page. By lamplight, she created new materials, suited to various ages and abilities, her left hand cramping with the effort, but her mind alive with purpose. When Thursday arrived, Emma was ready. Her small parlor had been transformed into a classroom, with her dining table serving as a desk, books arranged by subject, and slates propped against the wall. She'd even picked wildflowers for a small vase, a touch of beauty amid the practicality. The clip-clop of horses announced their arrival precisely at 2 o'clock. Emma smoothed her dress, her best, though modestly cut with a high collar to cover her neck scars, and stepped onto her porch. A wagon pulled by 2 chestnut horses stopped at her gate, driven by a weathered man she recognized as Pete Watson, Nathan's foreman. Beside him sat Nathan himself, his tall frame somehow making the wagon seat appear too small. In the wagon bed, 8 children of various ages peered curiously at her cottage. The Watson siblings waved enthusiastically, while the others, 5 children she didn't recognize, remained shyly silent. "Miss Mitchell," Pete called in greeting, touching his hat. "Hope we ain't late." "Perfectly on time, Mr. Watson," Emma replied, descending her porch steps. She was acutely aware of the unfamiliar children's stares, their innocent curiosity about her scars, lacking the adult's practiced avoidance. Nathan jumped down from the wagon with athletic ease. "Miss Mitchell, found a few more who need schooling if that's acceptable." Emma took in the additional faces, 3 boys and 2 girls, ranging from perhaps 6 to 12 years old. "All are welcome. I've prepared materials for different levels." The children clambered down from the wagon, the Watson siblings leading the way with familiar confidence, while the others followed more hesitantly. A small girl with braided blonde hair half hid behind an older boy who resembled her strongly enough to be her brother. "Children," Nathan said, his deep voice immediately commanding their attention, "this is Miss Mitchell. She was Willow Creek's teacher before most of you were old enough for school. You'll show her the same respect you'd show me. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," followed his words. Emma was struck by the naturalness of his authority, not harsh but expectant, as though good behavior was simply assumed. "Let's get you all settled inside," Emma suggested, motioning toward the open door. As the children filed past, she stopped the eldest boy with the blonde sister. "What's your name?" "Daniel Miller, ma'am," he answered, nervous but polite. "This is my sister Lucy. She's shy with strangers." Emma crouched to the little girl's level, carefully turning so her unscarred side was more prominent. "Hello, Lucy. I have some picture books inside that need someone with gentle hands to look at them. Do you think you could help me with that?" The girl peeked around her brother's arm, nodded slightly, then quickly retreated. It was a start, Emma thought. She'd won over anxious children before, though admittedly without the additional challenge of her appearance. Once the children were seated around her dining table and on cushions repurposed as floor seating, Emma turned to find Nathan and Pete still standing by the wagon. "You're welcome to observe," she offered. Surprised they hadn't already departed, Pete shook his head. "Got fence work waiting. I'll be back at 5 to collect them." Nathan hesitated, then said, "I'd like to see how you begin, if that's no intrusion." "My mother would ask for details." Emma nodded, both pleased and nervous at the prospect of being observed. "Of course. Your mother's experience would be valuable. Please, come in." Inside, Nathan positioned himself unobtrusively in a corner, his tall frame making her small parlor seem even more modest. Emma pushed aside her self-consciousness and focused on the children, beginning with a simple assessment to determine each child's abilities. Within minutes, she was immersed in the familiar rhythm of teaching, moving between groups as they worked on appropriate tasks. The youngest practicing letters on slates, the middle group reading simple passages, the eldest tackling arithmetic problems. She'd forgotten the joy of this work, the satisfaction of watching understanding dawn in young eyes. When she glanced up an hour later, Nathan was still there, watching with quiet intensity. Rather than finding his presence intrusive, Emma realized she'd forgotten it entirely, absorbed in her teaching. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared purpose. By 5 o'clock, when Pete returned with the wagon, Emma had completed her assessments and developed a plan for each child. The transformation in the children was remarkable. Even shy Lucy had ventured a few words by the end of the session, carefully showing Emma a picture she'd drawn. As the children gathered their things, Nathan approached, his expression thoughtful. "You have a gift with them." Emma felt a flush of pleasure at the simple statement. Teaching is more than imparting facts. It's connecting with each child, as they are. "My mother would agree." He hesitated, then added, "She's asked if you might call on her sometime. She doesn't travel to town anymore." The invitation surprised Emma. Clara Hayes was something of a legend in the territory, one of the pioneer women who had brought civilization and education to the frontier. "I'd be honored, but you're concerned about how it might appear," he finished when she faltered. Emma appreciated his directness. In a town like Willow Creek, appearances matter. Your association with me, even professionally, may invite unwelcome attention. A hint of his earlier hardness returned to his features. I don't arrange my affairs to suit town gossips, Miss Mitchell. A luxury not everyone can afford, she replied quietly. Something in her tone made him study her more carefully. The fire, it changed how people treated you. It wasn't a question, but Emma answered anyway. Yes, though perhaps it merely revealed truths that were already there, beneath the surface. Nathan nodded slowly, as though her words confirmed something he'd long suspected. Saturday, he said abruptly. Mother would welcome you for tea. I can send the wagon at 2. Before Emma could formulate a response, he touched his hat brim and strode toward the waiting wagon, calling for the children to board. She watched them depart, the children waving enthusiastically, already looking forward to the next lesson. Emma spent Friday reorganizing her small cottage to better serve as a classroom, moving furniture to create distinct learning areas and hanging a slate board on the wall. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her thoughts about the upcoming visit to Evergreen Ranch. Tea with Clara Hayes was an honor, certainly, but Emma wasn't naive about how such a visit would be interpreted in town. By Saturday morning, her anxiety had manifested in a careful selection of her attire. Her second-best dress, modest but well-made, its high collar and left-sided styling chosen to minimize the visibility of her scars. Emma arranged her hair to partly shield the left side of her face, a practice technique that had become second nature. Precisely at 2, a wagon arrived, smaller and more elegant than the one used for the children, with a matched pair of greys in the traces. To Emma's surprise, Nathan himself was driving, not a ranch hand. Mr. Hayes, she greeted him, suddenly uncertain. I didn't expect you personally. Mother's request, he explained simply, stepping down to help her board. His hand was warm and calloused as it briefly clasped hers, strong yet careful. The drive to Evergreen Ranch took them first through town, where Saturday shoppers paused to observe the unusual sight of the reclusive rancher with the scarred former teacher. Emma kept her gaze forward, pretending not to notice the stares and whispers. Beside her, Nathan seemed entirely unconcerned with the attention, handling the team with relaxed competence. Does it bother you? He asked unexpectedly as they left the town behind. They're staring. Emma considered her answer carefully. Not the staring itself. Children stare openly from innocent curiosity. It's the judgment behind adult stares that wounds, the assumption that my outer changes reflect inner diminishment. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. War taught me similar lessons about people's perceptions. Some look at a veteran and see only what they believe he must have become, not who he might still be. The simple observation created a bridge of understanding between them. Both had experienced the weight of others' assumptions, the burden of being defined by expectations rather than truth. Neither spoke again until they crested a rise that revealed Evergreen Ranch spread below them. Emma caught her breath at the sight. The ranch house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around it. Outbuildings formed a neat cluster nearby, bunkhouse, barn, stables, smokehouse, and beyond them, fenced pastures stretched toward pine-covered hills. A creek glittered in the afternoon sun as it wound through the property. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. Nathan's expression softened with evident pride. My grandfather chose this valley for the water and shelter. My father built most of what you see. I've merely maintained it. I doubt that's true, Emma observed. The ranch has prospered under your management, from what I hear. He glanced at her, surprised. You've heard about my management? Emma smiled slightly. Willow Creek may have redesigned social boundaries around me, Mr. Hayes, but gossip still flows freely within earshot. Your methods are considered unconventional, but effective. Unconventional, he repeated with a hint of amusement. A polite term for stubborn, my mother would say. They continued down the gentle slope toward the ranch house, passing cattle grazing in lush pastures. As they approached, Emma noticed details she'd missed from a distance: the carefully tended flower beds surrounding the house, the rocking chairs on the porch, the windmill pumping water into a large tank. Signs of prosperity, certainly, but also of care. Nathan drew the wagon to a stop before the house and helped Emma down. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a slender older woman leaning on a polished oak cane. Despite her obvious physical frailty, Clara Hayes's bearing was regal, her silver hair neatly arranged, her blue eyes, so like her son's, sharp and intelligent. "Miss Mitchell," she greeted Emma warmly. "What a pleasure to finally meet you." Nathan, help an old woman back inside before she disgracefully collapses on the porch. Nathan complied with a gentle patience that revealed much about their relationship. "Mother, you're supposed to wait for assistance before coming outside." "At my age, one doesn't waste opportunities for independence," Clara retorted, though she accepted his supporting arm. To Emma, she added, "My son treats me like delicate china. Since my fall last year, a broken hip apparently transforms a woman who crossed the plains by wagon into a helpless invalid." Emma immediately liked Clara Hayes, recognizing in her the same directness her son possessed. "I imagine you're anything but helpless, Mrs. Hayes." "Clara, please," the older woman insisted as they entered a comfortably furnished parlor. "And you're quite right. My body may be failing, but my mind and tongue remain dangerously sharp." Tea was already prepared, a silver service laid out on a table by the window where Clara clearly spent much of her time, judging by the books, and knitting arranged nearby. Nathan settled his mother in her chair with practiced ease, adjusting pillows and ensuring her comfort before turning to Emma. "I have some matters to attend to," he said. "Will you be comfortable with Mother for an hour?" "More than comfortable," Emma assured him, taking the seat Clara indicated opposite her. After Nathan departed, Clara studied Emma frankly over the rim of her teacup. "So you're the young woman who ran into a burning building to save children." Nathan described your courage with admiration. Emma felt color rise in her cheeks. Any teacher would have done the same. "No," Clara contradicted firmly, "they wouldn't have. Courage isn't common, Miss Mitchell, despite what tales of the frontier might suggest. I've known plenty who talk bravely but falter when tested." She set her cup down precisely, "just as I know many who judge appearances while missing the substance beneath." The reference to Emma's scars was oblique but clear. Rather than causing discomfort, Clara's straightforward acknowledgement was refreshing. "Your son shares your directness," Emma observed. Clara smiled fondly. "Nathan was always the most honest of my children, even as a boy. The war intensified that quality, stripped away his patience for pretense." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about the children's aptitudes. Who shows promise? Who needs special attention?" For the next hour, Emma found herself engaged in the most stimulating professional conversation she'd had in years. Clara Hayes was indeed a born teacher, asking insightful questions and offering practical suggestions based on her extensive experience. The older woman's mind remained razor-sharp despite her physical limitations, and her understanding of educational theory impressed Emma greatly. "You miss teaching in a proper school," Clara observed during a lull in their discussion. Emma nodded, surprised by the sudden tightness in her throat. "Yes, very much." "The children's reactions to your scars, they're not the obstacle, are they?" Clara's perception was uncomfortably accurate. "No," Emma admitted. "Children adapt quickly, It's the parents, the school board. Margaret Winters, Clara finished bluntly. That woman has appointed herself guardian of propriety since arriving in the territory, as if 30 years of wealth grants authority over matters of character and worth. Emma hesitated, wary of speaking ill of Willow Creek's most influential citizen even here. You need not be diplomatic, my dear, Clara assured her. The Winters family and I have a history of mutual disregard dating back to when Samuel's father tried to clear-cut the watershed that feeds this valley. Joseph, my late husband, stopped him through legal means, though Charles Winters never forgave the public embarrassment. The parlor clock chimed 4, interrupting their conversation. Clara looked toward the window with a small frown. Nathan should have returned by now. He's usually punctual to a fault. As if summoned by his mother's concern, the front door opened, and Nathan's distinctive footsteps crossed the entry hall. When he appeared in the parlor doorway, Emma immediately sensed something was wrong. His expression was controlled, but tension radiated from his posture. "Forgive the delay," he said, his gaze moving between them. "There was an issue with the north pasture fence." Clara studied her son with the penetrating insight of a mother. What kind of issue exactly? Nathan hesitated, clearly reluctant to elaborate in Emma's presence. "It's been resolved." "Nathan," Clara said firmly, "Miss Mitchell is not some delicate town gossip who will swoon at ranch difficulties. What happened?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips at his mother's characterization. "Someone cut through a section of fence near the creek. Cattle got into the lower meadow where we'd planted alfalfa for winter feed." "Deliberate sabotage?" Clara asked sharply. "The wire was cut, not broken." Nathan's gaze shifted to Emma. "I apologize for discussing ranch problems during your visit." Emma shook her head. "No apology needed. I'm sorry for the trouble it's caused you." Clara tapped her cane against the floor in evident irritation. The Winters family grows bolder. First offers to buy, then hints about water rights challenges, now this. "We don't know it was them," Nathan cautioned, though his tone suggested he harbored few doubts. "Who else would benefit from damaging Evergreen's operation?" Clara demanded. The conversation had taken an uncomfortable turn, making Emma acutely aware of her position as an outsider. She set her teacup down and smoothed her skirt. "Perhaps I should return to town. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "Nonsense," Clara objected. "You'll stay for supper as planned. I've instructed Mrs. Quinn to prepare her famous venison stew, and I won't have ranch troubles spoil our evening." Nathan's expression softened as he looked at his mother. "I need to check the other boundary fences before dark. Frank's already riding the west line." "Then Miss Mitchell can keep me company until you return," Clara decided. "I've been telling her about my early teaching days in the mining camps. I haven't had such a receptive audience in years." Nathan glanced at Emma, silently questioning whether she was indeed comfortable staying longer. The consideration touched her. He seemed genuinely concerned about her feelings, rather than merely being polite. "I'd be delighted to hear more," Emma assured them both. "Mrs. Hayes, Clara, has been most enlightening about territorial education." After Nathan departed, Clara insisted on showing Emma the library, moving slowly but determinedly with her cane through the house. The Hayes home revealed itself as they walked. Comfortable rather than ostentatious, with quality furnishings chosen for durability rather than fashion. Family photographs lined the hallway, showing 3 generations of the Hayes family. Clara paused beside one portrait, touching the frame gently. "This is Matthew, Nathan's younger brother, lost at Gettysburg." Emma studied the photograph of a handsome young man in uniform, his resemblance to Nathan striking despite his more carefree expression. "I'm sorry for your loss." "One of 20,000 that day alone," Clara said quietly. "Nathan was with him, carried him to the field hospital, but it was too late." She continued down the hallway. He came home changed, withdrew from everyone except immediate family. Some in town call it pride or oddity. I call it grief and purpose. He pours himself into this land because it's something he can protect, unlike his brother. The library proved worth the journey. A large room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, comfortable leather chairs positioned near a stone fireplace, and a massive oak desk beneath windows overlooking the creek. Emma couldn't hide her delight at the collection. Joseph believed in the importance of books on the frontier, Clara explained, settling into a chair while Emma explored the shelves. He ordered from catalogs, had friends send volumes from back east. The children grew up surrounded by literature, history, science. It's magnificent, Emma said sincerely, running her fingers along leather-bound spines. The town library is a quarter this size. Feel free to borrow anything that interests you, Clara offered. Books languishing on shelves are a sad waste. Emma selected several volumes on progressive teaching methods, as well as a collection of simplified Shakespeare she thought might engage her older students. As she and Clara discussed educational philosophy, Emma felt a spreading warmth at being treated as a professional again. Her opinions solicited, her experience valued. The sun was lowering toward the western hills when Nathan returned, bringing the crisp scent of outdoors with him as he entered the library. His expression was grim, though it lightened somewhat when he saw Emma enthusiastically discussing a book with his mother. "Any further trouble?" Clara asked immediately. "2 more. Cut fences," he confirmed. Frank found tracks heading toward town. "At least 3 riders." Clara's lips thinned in anger. This goes beyond neighborly disagreement. Nathan's gaze moved to Emma. "I apologize, but I'll need to escort you back to town earlier than planned. I want to return before full dark to check the herd." "Of course," Emma said, rising immediately. "I understand completely." Clara looked disappointed but nodded. "Take the books you selected, my dear, and please come again soon. It's been a true pleasure having intelligent conversation." The ride back to town was initially quiet, the golden light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the valley. Nathan handled the team with the same competence he'd shown earlier, but Emma could sense the increased tension in his posture, the watchfulness in his gaze as he scanned the surrounding country. "I hope the damage isn't too severe," she ventured after several minutes of silence. Nathan glanced at her. "The immediate damage is manageable. The intent behind it is more concerning." "You believe it was the Winters family?" "Not Margaret. Herself, certainly. Possibly Samuel, though it seems beneath even his standards." Nathan frowned. "More likely hired trouble, meant to pressure us into reconsidering their offer for water rights." Emma considered this. "The Winters timber operation needs more water. They're planning to expand into cattle," Nathan explained. "The creek that runs through Evergreen controls water access for the entire Eastern Valley. Without it, their land is too dry for anything but limited grazing. And they can't simply purchase water rights separately. Not in Montana territory. Water rights are tied to the land." His hands tightened on the reins. "Samuel's latest offer was for 5,000 acres, our entire eastern section, including the main creek and its tributaries. The amount of land at stake surprised Emma. That would significantly reduce Evergreen Ranch. "It would cripple it," Nathan corrected. "We'd lose our best water source and prime grazing land. The Hayes family has worked that land for 3 generations. I won't be the one to surrender it." His quiet vehemence revealed how deeply the situation troubled him. Emma recalled Clara's words about Nathan pouring himself into the ranch as something he could protect. The land represented more than economic value to him. It was legacy, purpose, perhaps even redemption. "Your teaching the ranch children has complicated matters," Nathan admitted after another stretch of silence. Emma felt a chill of apprehension. "Because Margaret Winters disapproves?" "Because it represents connection between Evergreen and town that doesn't flow through her approval." he clarified. The Winters family has spent years cultivating influence, controlling which ranch hands can get credit at the general store, which families receive church charity, which businesses thrive or struggle. And now you've aligned yourself with the town pariah, Emma concluded, unable to keep a trace of bitterness from her voice. Nathan looked at her directly, his gaze startlingly intense. I've aligned myself with a woman of integrity and courage who happens to be the best teacher these children could hope for. If that disturbs Margaret Winter's sense of proper order, so be it. The simple declaration left Emma momentarily speechless. After 2 years of being defined primarily by her scars, treated as an object of pity or discomfort, Nathan's matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her value as a teacher felt revolutionary. They were approaching town now, the wagon rolling past outlying farms toward Willow Creek's main street. Saturday evening found the town lively, with ranch hands and miners from nearby operations filling the saloon and families strolling the boardwalks. Emma became acutely conscious of the attention their arrival would attract. Perhaps you could let me off at the edge of town, she suggested, to avoid unnecessary gossip. Nathan's expression hardened slightly. Are you ashamed to be seen with me, Miss Mitchell? Of course not, Emma replied, startled by the question. I was thinking of your reputation. My reputation is of little concern to me, he said flatly. And if you're worried about yours, I assure you that being seen in my wagon won't damage it further in the eyes of those who already whisper about your scars. His bluntness was both jarring and refreshing. You're very direct, Mr. Hayes. Life's too short for carefully constructed falsehoods, he replied. The war taught me that, if nothing else. As they turned onto Main Street, Emma straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Let them stare and whisper. Nathan was right. Her reputation had already been reshaped by forces beyond her control. What mattered now were the choices she made within those new boundaries. The wagon rolled past Abigail's bookshop, where her friend stood in the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of Emma beside Nathan Hayes. Past Patterson's general store, where Samuel Winters stood in conversation with several well-dressed men, his gaze sharpening as he noticed them. Past the church, where Reverend Collins paused in sweeping the steps, his expression thoughtful. By the time they reached Emma's cottage, she felt as though she'd run a gauntlet, though Nathan appeared entirely unaffected by the attention they'd drawn. He helped her down from the wagon with the same careful courtesy he'd shown earlier, then handed her the books she'd borrowed from the Hayes Library. Thank you for visiting, Mother, he said. She enjoyed your company tremendously. The pleasure was mine, Emma replied sincerely. She's a remarkable woman. Nathan's expression softened. She is, and she has excellent judgment about people. He gathered the reins, preparing to depart. The children's next lesson is Tuesday at 2. I'll bring them myself. It wasn't a question, and Emma didn't treat it as one. I'll be ready. She watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing down the dusty road toward Evergreen Ranch. Only when he was out of sight did Emma enter her cottage, her mind swirling with the day's revelations. One thing was increasingly clear. Her decision to teach the ranch children had drawn her into the long-standing conflict between the Hayes and Winters families, with consequences she couldn't yet foresee. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm, the kind of spring day that promised summer's approach. Emma prepared for church with her usual care, selecting a high-necked dress in dove grey that minimized attention and arranging her hair to partially shield her scarred cheek. Though some townspeople had hinted she might be more comfortable praying privately at home, Emma had never relinquished her place in the congregation. Faith, at least, remained accessible despite her changed appearance. The small white church at the end of Main Street was nearly full when Emma arrived, slipping quietly into her usual seat in the back row. From this vantage point, She could observe without being directly in anyone's line of sight, a strategic choice that minimized the discomfort her presence sometimes caused. Reverend Collins had just called the congregation to worship when a stir near the entrance drew all eyes. Nathan Hayes entered, his tall frame instantly recognizable, with Clara leaning on his arm. The Hayes family had their own pew near the front, a privilege of founding families, but it had remained empty since Nathan's return from the war. His religious observances, like much of his life, had become private rather than public. Their appearance caused a ripple of whispers as Nathan carefully settled his mother in the family pew before taking his place beside her. From across the church, Emma could see Clara's silver head bent toward her son, apparently asking a question. Nathan's response made her smile and pat his hand approvingly. Emma wasn't the only one who noticed this unexpected development. Margaret Winters, resplendent in burgundy silk in her own family pew, studied the Hayes with narrowed eyes before leaning to whisper something to Samuel beside her. The younger Winters' gaze swept the congregation until it found Emma in her back corner, his expression calculating. Reverend Collins recovered quickly from his own surprise, welcoming the congregation with particular warmth. "How pleasing it is to see old friends return to our fellowship," he noted, his glance toward the Hayes pew leaving no doubt about his meaning. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing his children back to community when they, and we, most need it." Throughout the service, Emma found her attention drawn repeatedly to Nathan's broad shoulders in the front pew. His return to church after such a long absence seemed significant, though she couldn't determine whether it related to their conversations or was merely coincidental. Either way, it represented another crack in his self-imposed isolation. When the service concluded, Emma remained seated, allowing most congregants to depart before making her own exit. Another habit developed to minimize awkward encounters. She was preparing to leave when she realized Nathan and Clara had been similarly delayed by well-wishers apparently eager to welcome them back to regular attendance. Clara noticed Emma and raised her hand in greeting, beckoning her forward. Reluctantly aware of curious eyes, Emma made her way to the front of the now emptying church. "Miss Mitchell," Clara greeted her warmly. "How lovely to see you again. So soon. Nathan, help me outside while Miss Mitchell gathers her things. I believe Reverend Collins wished to speak with her." The manipulation was transparent but effective. Nathan assisted his mother toward the door while Emma collected her Bible and gloves. As predicted, Reverend Collins approached, his kind face thoughtful. "Miss Mitchell, a moment if you please." Emma braced herself. The minister had always been compassionate toward her, but he was also influenced by his most prominent parishioners, namely the Winters family. "I understand you've begun teaching again," he said without preamble, "including children from Evergreen Ranch." "Yes, Reverend, just basic education for those struggling in the regular school." He nodded slowly. "A worthy endeavor. The Lord gives each of us gifts to use in service." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Winters has expressed some concerns about this arrangement." "I imagined she might," Emma replied evenly. "She feels it might undermine the authority of our new schoolteacher, Mr. Phillips. The children I'm teaching have already been dismissed from his classroom for falling behind," Emma pointed out. "I'm supplementing their education, not replacing it." A fair point. The minister studied her with unexpected directness. "There is another matter, however. Mrs. Winters feels your condition might disturb the more sensitive children." The familiar pain of such assessments washed through Emma, though she'd grown skilled at concealing it. "By condition, you mean my scars from rescuing children from a burning building?" Reverend Collins had the grace to look uncomfortable. I merely relay her concerns, Miss Mitchell. For my part, I've always believed the Lord looks at the heart, not the outward appearance. How comforting, Emma said quietly. If only more of his followers shared that perspective. Outside, the churchyard buzzed with Sunday socialization. Families and friends gathered in conversational clusters that would determine much of the coming week's gossip and business arrangements. Emma emerged to find Nathan waiting beside his wagon, Clara already seated with a shawl tucked around her despite the warm day. "Miss Mitchell," Nathan called, drawing attention their way, "Mother insists you join us for Sunday dinner. Mrs. Quinn has prepared far too much for just the two of us." The invitation, delivered publicly and with such casual assurance, caused an immediate lull in nearby conversations. Emma was acutely aware of Margaret Winters watching from nearby, her expression a study in disapproval. Before Emma could formulate a response that might minimize the social disruption, Clara spoke up, her voice carrying with surprising strength for such a frail-looking woman. "Do say yes, my dear. I've so enjoyed our educational discussions, and there's a particular book on natural science instruction I want to show you for the children's benefit." Emma hesitated only briefly before making her decision. "I'd be honored to join you, Mrs. Hayes." She approached the wagon, aware of the whispers erupting behind her. As Nathan helped her up beside Clara, Emma caught sight of Margaret Winters' face, a mask of rigid displeasure as she gathered her family around her like a queen summoning courtiers. Samuel's expression was harder to read, a calculation occurring behind his carefully neutral features that made Emma uneasy. "Well done," Clara murmured as Nathan took his place and set the horses in motion. "Small victories matter in long campaigns." Emma wasn't entirely certain what victory had been achieved, but she recognized the significance of the moment. The scarred former teacher and the reclusive rancher family publicly aligning themselves against the town's established social order. For better or worse, a statement had been made that would ripple through Willow Creek's carefully maintained hierarchy. The drive to Evergreen Ranch was pleasant, the spring day perfect for traveling. Clara proved to be an engaging conversationalist, sharing stories of the territory's early days when settlers were few and dangers many. Her recollections painted a vivid picture of frontier life that history books rarely captured. The practical challenges, unexpected kindnesses, and stubborn determination that had built communities like Willow Creek. "People forget," Clara remarked as they approached the ranch, "that civilization here is still a fragile thing. A few bad winters, a financial panic back east, a change in railroad plans, any of these could erase what we've built." Her blue eyes, so like her son's, held a sharp wisdom. Those who believe their position is secure enough to dictate others' worth are particularly vulnerable to such reminders. Sunday dinner at Evergreen Ranch proved to be a far more substantial affair than Emma had anticipated. Mrs. Quinn, the Hayes cook and housekeeper, had indeed prepared enough for a gathering twice their size: roast beef with spring vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and 3 different pies cooling on the sideboard. Mrs. Quinn believes in the power of abundant food to solve most of life's problems, Nathan explained as they seated themselves in the dining room, a handsome space with windows overlooking the eastern pastures. "A philosophy I heartily endorse," Clara added with a smile, "though my doctor might disagree." The meal passed pleasantly, the conversation flowing more easily than Emma would have expected. Nathan remained quiet compared to his mother, but he contributed thoughtfully when drawn out, particularly when the topics turned to ranch operations or territorial politics. Emma found herself enjoying his dry observations and occasional flashes of unexpected humor. After dessert, a slice of rhubarb pie that Mrs. Quinn insisted Emma try, Clara requested Nathan's help to the library, leaving Emma to follow. The older woman moved slowly but determinedly, leaning on both her cane and her son's strong arm. Forgive an old woman's pace, Clara said over her shoulder to Emma. The body betrays us eventually, but I refuse to surrender to a rocking chair on the porch just yet. In the library, Clara directed Nathan to retrieve several books from higher shelves she could no longer reach. The natural science volume I mentioned, and that collection of mathematical exercises for practical applications. She settled into her favorite chair with a small sigh. Teaching was always more than reading and figures to me. It was preparation for the lives my students would actually lead. The most valuable education, Emma agreed, accepting the books Nathan handed her. The new territorial curriculum emphasizes standardized knowledge, but fails to connect it to daily experience. Precisely why these ranch children need your approach, Clara said firmly. Their world isn't contained in Eastern textbooks about environments they'll never see and occupations they'll never enter. Nathan listened to their conversation with evident interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed his own thoughtful consideration of educational philosophy. Emma found herself increasingly impressed by the depth behind his quiet exterior. This was no simple rancher, but a man of considerable intelligence who simply chose his words with care. As afternoon stretched toward evening, Nathan excused himself to check on ranch operations, leaving Emma and Clara in the comfortable library. Once he'd departed, Clara's expression grew more serious. I hope you'll forgive an old woman's directness. My dear, but there's something I must discuss with you. Emma nodded, setting aside the book she'd been examining. Of course. You've likely noticed that your teaching arrangement has placed you in a precarious position regarding the Winters family. Clara's gaze was penetrating. Margaret has never forgiven the Hayes family for thwarting her husband's plans years ago, and she sees your association with us as another affront. I've gathered as much, Emma acknowledged. Reverend Collins hinted at her disapproval this morning. It will go beyond disapproval, Clara warned. Margaret Winters doesn't merely influence Willow Creek. She controls much of it through financial arrangements and social leverage. The merchants extend credit at her recommendation. The church building fund depends on her donations. Even the new school exists primarily because she donated the land. Emma considered this sobering assessment. You're suggesting she might take action against me for teaching the ranch children? Against you, against the ranch, against anyone who challenges her authority, Clara confirmed. I tell you this not to frighten you, but to prepare you. Choices have consequences in small communities, and while I believe you're making the right choice, you should do so with clear understanding. I appreciate your candor, Emma said quietly, but I've already lost most of what Margaret Winters could take from me. My teaching position, my social standing, my place in town life, these disappeared with my unmarred face. Clara studied her thoughtfully. Yet you continued attending church, maintained your cottage, kept your dignity. Don't underestimate what remains to be lost or gained. Before Emma could respond to this cryptic observation, they heard Nathan's return, his footsteps in the hallway accompanied by another's. He appeared in the doorway with Frank Miller, his foreman, whose weathered face bore an expression of contained anger. Trouble? Clara asked immediately. Cattle missing, Nathan replied tersely. 20 head from the north pasture. Frank twisted his hat in his hands. Trail leads east toward town, then splits. Been following signs since noon. Didn't want to interrupt your Sunday, boss, but you did right, Nathan assured him. Gather 6 men. We'll start at first light. The foreman nodded, touched his hat brim to the ladies, and departed. Nathan's expression had hardened into something Emma hadn't seen before. The pleasant host replaced by a man facing a direct threat to his livelihood. 20 head represents significant loss, Clara said quietly. It's not about the cattle, Nathan replied. It's about proving they can take what they want, testing our response. Emma felt suddenly intrusive, witnessing a family crisis. I should return to town. You have more important matters than escorting me. Nonsense, Clara objected. Nathan can drive you back on his way to speak with Sheriff Collins. The situations are connected after all. Nathan nodded agreement, though his mind was clearly already focused on the coming confrontation. He helped his mother to her feet, and the warmth in his manner toward her contrasted sharply with the coldness that had entered his eyes. As they prepared to depart, Clara pressed the books they'd discussed into Emma's hands. Use these for the children, and remember what I said. Understand the consequences, but don't fear them. The ride back to town was quiet. Nathan's thoughts, clearly occupied with the stolen cattle and what they represented. Emma respected his preoccupation, using the time to consider Clara's warnings. The peaceful Sunday had transformed into something more ominous, a reminder that her simple desire to teach had entangled her in conflicts she hadn't anticipated. When they reached Willow Creek's main street, the early evening found it relatively quiet, most families at home for Sunday supper. Nathan drew the wagon to a halt before the sheriff's office rather than taking Emma directly to her cottage. "I apologize for the detour," he said, breaking his long silence. "I need to report the theft immediately." "Of course," Emma replied. "I can walk from here. It's not far." Nathan's expression softened slightly as he looked at her, as though remembering his duties as host despite the circumstances. "Thank you for visiting, Mother. She values your company greatly." "The feeling is mutual," Emma assured him. "Mrs. Hayes is a remarkable woman." He helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands steady and careful. For a moment, they stood, facing each other on the boardwalk, an unspoken communication passing between them. Recognition of shared purpose despite the complications swirling around them. "Tuesday at 2, Emma said quietly, reaffirming their teaching arrangement. Nathan nodded, the simple gesture containing a depth of meaning beyond words. Then he turned toward the sheriff's office, his shoulders set with determination, leaving Emma to walk home through the gathering dusk. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Emma's cottage. She was in her garden, taking advantage of the cool morning air to tend young plants, when hoofbeats announced a rider approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see Dr. Thomas Wilson, Willow Creek's physician, dismounting at her gate. "Miss Mitchell," he called in greeting, "might I have a word?" Emma brushed soil from her hands and rose to meet him, puzzled by his appearance. Dr. Wilson had treated her burns after the fire, visiting her cottage daily during her painful recovery. Since then, their interactions had been cordial, but limited to occasional greetings in town. "Dr. Wilson, this is unexpected." The physician, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, approached with his usual unhurried manner. "I was passing by and thought I'd check on your hand. The scarring still causing stiffness?" It was a transparent excuse. His route to anywhere in town wouldn't naturally pass her isolated cottage, but Emma appreciated the courtesy of the pretense. "Some days are better than others. The damp weather makes it worse." He nodded, his medical demeanor giving way to something more personal. "Emma, I'll be direct. There's talk in town about your arrangement with Evergreen Ranch, teaching the children, visiting the Hayes family." "I imagined there might be," she replied carefully. "I'm not here to discourage you," he clarified quickly. "Quite the opposite. I believe it's a positive development for everyone involved, particularly you." Emma studied him with surprise. "Thank you, not everyone shares that view." "Margaret Winters, you mean?" His usual diplomatic tone held an edge of frustration. "She came to me this morning, suggesting your burns might have affected more than your appearance, perhaps your judgment or emotional stability. She hinted the town council might require a medical assessment of your fitness to teach, even privately." The familiar humiliation washed through Emma, though she'd grown skilled at hiding its effects. "I see. And what did you tell her?" My medical opinion was a private matter between doctor and patient, he replied firmly, and that should such an assessment ever be legally required, I would evaluate you with the same impartial standards I would apply to anyone, including her. Nephew Samuel, whose recent behavior might raise questions about his own judgment. Emma couldn't suppress a small smile at this unexpected ally. That was perhaps not the response she hoped for. Margaret Winters has grown accustomed to controlling this town through money and social pressure, Dr. Wilson said, his usual reserve, giving way to rare candor. But a doctor answers to higher authorities than social hierarchies. I appreciate your support, Emma said sincerely, though I imagine it may cost you in Mrs. Winters' good graces. Dr. Wilson's expression held a hint of mischief, unusual for his serious demeanor. I've saved enough of this town's citizens, including her grandniece last winter, to make my practice secure. Besides, I'm old enough now to value integrity over convenience. As he prepared to depart, he added more seriously, "Be careful, Emma. Margaret isn't accustomed to opposition. The Hayes family can weather her displeasure, but your position is more vulnerable." "You're the second person to warn me in as many days," Emma observed. "Yet I find I'm less afraid than I might have expected." "Good," he said approvingly. "Fear serves no healing purpose, physical or social." He mounted his horse with the careful movements of a man no longer young, but still capable. "I'll see you at the Founders' Day planning meeting tomorrow. The committee specifically requested your participation." This information startled Emma. "The committee? But Mrs. Winters chairs all town celebrations." "Indeed she does," Dr. Wilson replied with meaning, "which makes the request all the more interesting, wouldn't you say?" After he'd ridden away, Emma remained in her garden, considering this unexpected development. The annual Founders' Day celebration was Willow Creek's most significant community event, commemorating the town's establishment 30 years earlier. Margaret Winters had chaired the planning committee for the past decade, using the position to reinforce social standings and community relationships according to her vision of proper order. An invitation to participate, especially to someone who had been carefully excluded from town functions for the past 2 years, could hardly be innocent. Yet refusing would only confirm whispers about her withdrawal from community life. It was, Emma realized, a carefully constructed trap, with judgment waiting regardless of her choice. Tuesday arrived with a sense of anticipation that had been absent from Emma's life for too long. She prepared her cottage classroom meticulously, arranging materials based on each child's needs as she'd assess them during their first session. The natural science book Clara had lent her provided the foundation for the day's lessons, with practical applications that would engage even the most reluctant learners. Precisely at 2 o'clock, the wagon from Evergreen Ranch arrived. Emma stepped onto her porch, expecting to see Pete Watson driving as before. Instead, Nathan himself handled the team, with Frank Miller riding alongside on horseback. The children's excited faces peered from the wagon bed, but Emma immediately sensed a tension that hadn't been present during their previous lesson. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted him as he helped the children down. "I hadn't expected you personally." Nathan's expression was controlled but serious. "Recent events have made us more cautious about who travels alone from the ranch." The missing cattle, Emma realized. The situation had escalated enough to warrant such precautions. Frank Miller remained mounted, his weathered face scanning the surrounding countryside with the alertness of a man anticipating trouble. "I'll return at 5, Nathan told her, his voice low enough that the children now filing into the cottage couldn't hear. "Frank will remain nearby. A precaution only," he added, seeing her concern. "Have there been further incidents?" Emma asked quietly. "None directly threatening," he replied carefully, "but it's best to be vigilant." As the children settled, into their places inside, Nathan hesitated on the porch, clearly wanting to say more, but constrained by circumstance. Finally, he simply said, "Be careful at the Founders' Day meeting. Margaret Winters doesn't extend invitations without purpose." "Dr. Wilson suggested as much," Emma acknowledged. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's features. "Thomas Wilson is a good man, one of the few in town who treated me normally after I returned from the war." This small piece of personal history freely offered felt significant. A continued opening of the barriers he maintained around his private thoughts. Before Emma could respond, little Lucy Miller appeared in the doorway, tugging shyly at Emma's skirt. "Miss Mitchell, I finished my letters practice from last time," the child said hopefully. "Did I do them right?" The moment for private conversation passed. Nathan touched his hat brim in farewell and returned to the wagon, while Emma turned her attention to her eager student. The lesson proceeded smoothly, despite the occasional glimpse of Frank Miller's watchful figure through the window, the children blissfully unaware of the adult tensions surrounding their education. By 5 o'clock, when Nathan returned to collect them, Emma had successfully completed lessons in reading, practical mathematics, and basic natural science, using examples from ranch life that resonated with the children's daily experiences. Their enthusiasm was reward enough, but Nathan's evident approval when he observed their progress added an unexpected layer of satisfaction. After the children had clambered aboard the wagon with their assignments and books, Nathan remained behind briefly while Frank organized their departure. "Mother asked me to invite you for Saturday afternoon," he said. "She's hosting a small gathering of former students, a tradition she's maintained for decades. She thought you might enjoy meeting others who've taught in the territory." The invitation touched Emma deeply. Not merely social inclusion, but professional recognition from someone whose opinion she valued. "I'd be honored." Nathan's expression softened. "Good. I'll arrange transportation." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "How did the town meeting go?" "It's this evening," Emma replied. "At the town hall at 7. He nodded, a shadow of concern crossing his features. "If you need assistance afterward, send word to the ranch, regardless of the hour." The offer, with its implication that she might indeed need help, should have been alarming. Instead, Emma found it oddly comforting, the knowledge that someone was prepared to stand beside her, whatever Margaret Winters might orchestrate. As twilight gathered over Willow Creek that evening, Emma prepared for the Founders' Day committee, meeting with the careful attention of someone readying for battle. Her dress was modest but dignified, her hair arranged to minimize her scars without suggesting shame or concealment. She had spent 2 years learning to navigate a world that found her appearance disturbing. Tonight, she would face that discomfort, directly in a public forum. The town hall, a sturdy 2-story building on Main Street, was illuminated by lamps in every window when Emma arrived. Several committee members were already gathered inside, their conversations faltering briefly as she entered before resuming with forced normality. Emma recognized the familiar pattern, initial shock at her scarred appearance, followed by determined efforts to behave naturally while avoiding direct gaze. Abigail Carter, Emma's loyal friend from the bookshop, approached immediately, her warm welcome genuine. "Emma, I'm so pleased you've joined the committee. We need your organizational skills desperately." Emma took her seat at the long table as committee members continued to arrive. Margaret Winters entered last, her burgundy dress rustling importantly as she swept through the door. Her gaze passed over everyone present, lingering briefly on Emma before she took her position at the head of the table. "Good evening," Margaret announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to command. "Let us begin with the agenda for this year's Founders' Day celebration." For the next hour, the committee discussed practical matters, the parade route, booth assignments for local businesses, schedule of speeches and performances. Emma contributed when appropriate, offering suggestions based on her experience organizing school events in previous years. To her surprise, most committee members received her input respectfully, though she noticed Margaret overriding her suggestions whenever possible. As the meeting progressed, Emma began to understand why she'd been invited. Margaret Winters was too skilled a tactician for direct confrontation. Instead, she employed subtle methods of isolation, seating arrangements that placed Emma slightly apart from others, comments that indirectly referenced her absence from town affairs, questions deliberately directed to areas where Emma's 2-year withdrawal left her uninformed. Each small exclusion built upon the others, reinforcing her outsider status without any action that could be labeled unkind. "Now," Margaret said as they neared the end of the agenda, "we come to the commemorative tableau. As many of you know, each Founders' Day features a living display depicting significant moments in Willow Creek's history. This year marks the 30th anniversary of our founding, and I propose something truly special." She paused for effect, her gaze sweeping the table. A series of 3 tableaux representing key moments in our development. First, the original settlement party's arrival. Second, the establishment of our first church. And finally, her eyes settled on Emma, a tribute to the schoolhouse fire that claimed our original educational building, but through tremendous sacrifice spared our children. A charged silence fell over the room. Emma felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. As Margaret continued, "I believe this tribute to bravery would be particularly meaningful with authentic participation. Miss Mitchell, your presence in the tableau would provide the emotional authenticity such a moment deserves." The trap revealed itself with elegant cruelty. To refuse would appear ungrateful, reinforcing whispers that she had withdrawn from community life. To accept meant public display of her scars as a spectacle of sacrifice, permanently cementing her identity as a victim rather than an educator. Emma felt every eye upon her, measuring her response. She took a careful breath, buying moments to collect her thoughts. "An interesting proposal," she said evenly, "though I wonder if emphasizing tragedy serves the celebratory nature of Founders' Day. Perhaps instead, we might focus on educational progress from the original one-room schoolhouse to our current building." Margaret's smile remained fixed. The fire wasn't merely tragedy, but triumph of self-sacrifice. Surely you wouldn't object to commemorating such bravery? "Not at all," Emma replied carefully. "Though I believe true commemoration honors outcomes rather than injuries, the children's survival and continued education seems the more significant focus." Dr. Wilson, who had remained silent throughout much of the meeting, spoke up unexpectedly. "I agree with Miss Mitchell. As someone who treated both the injured and traumatized after the fire, I believe celebrating educational resilience would be more uplifting than recreating a moment of crisis." A subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere, several committee members nodding agreement, others looking thoughtful. Margaret's expression hardened almost imperceptibly as she recognized the redirection. "Very well," she conceded, with practiced grace that didn't reach her eyes. "We shall take both proposals under consideration. The committee will vote at our next meeting." As the gathering concluded, Emma felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and quiet triumph. She had navigated the trap without falling into either alternative Margaret had designed. It was a small victory, but perhaps significant in demonstrating she would neither withdraw nor allow herself to be defined solely by her scars. Outside, the spring evening had turned cool, with clouds obscuring the stars. Emma wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as she prepared to walk home. Most committee members dispersed quickly, eager to return to their families after the long meeting. "Miss Mitchell," Samuel Winter's voice stopped her at the bottom of the town hall steps. He stood in the pool of lamplight, immaculately dressed. As always, his expression unreadable. "May I escort you home? These streets can be unsafe after dark." The offer was unexpected and immediately suspicious. "Thank you, but I've walked this path many times alone. I'll be fine." "I insist," he said, moving closer. "My aunt would be distressed if I allowed a lady to walk unaccompanied, regardless of circumstances." Before Emma could formulate a response that wouldn't create a scene, Abigail appeared beside her. "Emma's not alone, Mr. Winters. I'm accompanying her as my shop is on her way home." Samuel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How fortunate. Then I'll bid you both good night." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy before turning toward the Winters mansion on the hill. As they walked, Abigail kept her voice low. "Be careful around that one, Emma. There's something calculating in his manner lately that concerns me." "You think he meant me harm?" Emma asked, surprised. "Not physical harm, perhaps," Abigail replied thoughtfully. "But Samuel Winters doesn't offer assistance without purpose, especially to someone connected to Nathan Hayes." The remainder of the week passed in relative quietude. Emma continued teaching the ranch children, gradually expanding their lessons to include territorial history and basic science. Nathan, or Frank Miller, always accompanied the wagon now, a silent reminder of ongoing tensions beyond her small classroom. Saturday afternoon found Emma once again traveling to Evergreen Ranch, this time for Clara's gathering of former teachers. Nathan himself drove the wagon, his manner more relaxed than it had been during the week. "Has there been any progress regarding the missing cattle?" Emma ventured as they left town behind. "Sheriff Collins tracked them as far as the territorial border," Nathan replied. "After that, the trail went cold. 20 head don't simply vanish without organized effort. Do you still believe the Winters family was responsible?" Nathan's expression hardened. "Not directly. Samuel Winters wouldn't dirty his hands with actual theft, but men desperate enough to steal can often be hired by those with money and motive." At the ranch, Emma was surprised to find nearly a dozen visitors already gathered, men and women of varying ages, all former educators from across the territory. Clara presided from her chair by the fireplace, clearly delighted by the reunion she had orchestrated. "Emma, at last," she called. "Come meet colleagues who've taught in conditions that would make most Eastern educators faint dead away." The afternoon unfolded in a tapestry of shared experiences, professional discussions, and remarkable stories of frontier education. One elderly gentleman had taught in a mining camp, where lessons were conducted underground during winter blizzards. A middle-aged woman had established a school for Native American children, creating teaching materials in both English and their tribal language. Another had traveled a circuit of remote ranches, spending 2 weeks at each to provide basic education to isolated families. Emma found herself drawn into this community of educators who had overcome extraordinary obstacles to fulfill their calling. None seemed disturbed by her scars. Indeed, several bore their own marks of frontier hardship: a missing finger, a pronounced limp, weathered faces that told stories of survival. "You've found your footing again," Clara observed quietly, when they had a moment alone. "I see it in how you engage with them as colleagues, rather than holding yourself apart." "They make it easy," Emma admitted. "They see the teacher first, not the scars." "Because they understand that purpose survives circumstance," Clara replied. "Something Margaret Winters has never grasped, with all her wealth and influence." As the gathering began to disperse in late afternoon, Nathan approached Emma, where she stood on the porch, watching the golden light stretch across the valley. "You seemed at home with them," he observed. "I was," Emma acknowledged. "They reminded me of who I was before the fire, and perhaps who I might still become." Something in her tone made him study her more intently. "You're considering changes. "Oh, possibilities," she corrected gently. "Your mother's friends have shown me that teaching doesn't require a traditional classroom. Some travel circuits between isolated homesteads. Others establish small private academies." "You'd leave Willow Creek?" Nathan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Emma turned to face him fully. "I don't know. For 2 years, I've allowed myself to be defined by what happened, both the fire itself and the town's reaction to my scars. Perhaps it's time to define myself again." Nathan was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the ranch spreading below them. "This land has been Hayes' property for 3 generations, he said finally. "After the war, when I couldn't bear to face people or their questions, it became my refuge. Sometimes I wonder if it's also become my prison." The quiet confession surprised Emma. "What would freedom look like for you?" "I'm not certain," he admitted. "For years, protecting this land has been purpose enough. Recently, I've begun questioning whether purpose alone is sufficient." The conversation had entered territory neither had expected, revealing thoughts, normally kept private. Before it could progress further, a rider appeared at the far end of the ranch road, approaching at a gallop that suggested urgency. Nathan straightened, his expression shifting from introspective to alertly practical. "Something's wrong." The rider, one of the younger ranch hands, reined his lathered horse to a sliding stop before the porch. "Mr. Hayes, fire at the east. Past your fence line. Frank sent me to fetch you. Says it looks deliberate." "Tell the men to gather at the stable," Nathan ordered immediately. "Every hand who can ride, bring water barrels in the wagons." He turned to Emma, his expression grave. "I'm sorry. Go," she interrupted. "I understand completely." He hesitated only briefly before striding toward the stable, calling for his horse. Emma watched him go, then turned back to the house where Clara stood in the doorway, her expression concerned but composed. "Not the first fire we've faced," the older woman said calmly, "though the timing suggests intention rather than accident." "Is there anything I can do?" Emma asked. Clara nodded. "Indeed there is. You can help me coordinate from here. In an emergency, everyone needs clear direction. The hands respect Nathan, but in the chaos of a fire, communication often breaks down." For the next several hours, Evergreen Ranch operated like a military campaign, with Clara Hayes effectively directing operations from her library. Runners brought updates from the fire line, departing with fresh instructions and supplies. Emma found herself serving as Clara's assistant, recording information, organizing relief rotations, and preparing medical supplies for any injuries. Midnight had passed when Nathan finally returned, his face smoke-blackened, his clothing singed in places. Relief washed through Emma at the sight of him, whole and unharmed despite obvious exhaustion. "The fire's contained," he reported, accepting the coffee Emma offered. "We lost about 50 acres of pasture and a stretch of fence, but no cattle and no men injured. It could have been much worse." "Deliberate?" Clara asked quietly. Nathan's expression hardened. "Multiple ignition points along the property line. No question." He turned to Emma. "I can't take you back to town tonight. It's not safe on the roads, and the men need rest before morning." "I understand," Emma assured him. "Mrs. Quinn already showed me to a guest room." After Nathan had gone to clean up, Clara reached for Emma's hand. "Thank you for your help. Tonight, you have a remarkable capacity for calm in crisis." "Experience," Emma replied with a small smile, "though usually my crises involve children rather than cattle. The skills translate," Clara observed thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's why Nathan trusts you so readily. You both understand responsibility for others' welfare." The following morning dawned clear and cool, the scent of smoke still lingering in the air, but the immediate danger passed. Emma joined Clara for an early breakfast, both women having slept little during the night's events. "Nathan rode out at dawn to assess the full damage," Clara informed her. He left word that he'll drive you to town himself once he returns." Emma nodded, a mixture of emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. The previous day's conversation with Nathan had awakened possibilities she'd carefully avoided considering. Questions about her future, her place in the community, and increasingly, her feelings toward the quietly complex rancher who saw beyond her scars. Sheriff Collins arrived mid-morning, his expression grave as he examined the burned pasture and took statements from the ranch hands who had fought the fire. Emma watched from the porch as he and Nathan spoke at length near the damaged fence. Line, the law officer's body language, suggesting frustration rather than surprise. When they returned to the house, Sheriff Collins tipped his hat respectfully to Emma and Clara. "Ladies, unfortunate circumstances for a Sunday morning. Have you determined who's responsible?" Clara asked directly. The sheriff's weathered face reflected professional caution. "No concrete evidence yet, ma'am, though the timing and placement suggest someone familiar with ranch operations." "Someone or someone's hired men," Nathan added, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sheriff Collins sighed heavily. "Nathan, we've known each other since you were a boy. I respect your father's memory and your family's standing. But I need more than suspicion to act officially against anyone, especially when that anyone has significant influence in the county." "So they'll continue unchecked," Nathan concluded flatly. "I didn't say that." The sheriff's gaze was steady. "I said I need evidence. Meanwhile, I've deputized 2 additional men to patrol the area. If this is deliberate harassment, it will escalate. When it does, we'll be watching." After the sheriff departed, Nathan turned to Emma. "I should get you back to town. You've been caught in our troubles long enough." "I don't feel caught," Emma replied honestly. "I feel involved. There's a difference." Something in her response made his expression soften momentarily. "Nevertheless, you have students to prepare for tomorrow, and I've detained you overnight. Already, tongues will be wagging in Willow Creek as it is." The journey to town was quieter than usual, both of them occupied with their own thoughts after the night's events. As they approached Emma's cottage, Nathan finally broke the silence. "The Founders' Day celebration is next Saturday," he said unexpectedly. "Mother mentioned attending this year. She hasn't been in years, but feels it important now." Emma understood the implication immediately. Clara Hayes' presence at the celebration would make a statement about Evergreen Ranch's position in the community, a public stance that challenged Margaret Winter's social authority. "Will you attend as well?" she asked carefully. Nathan hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. "Large gatherings remain. Difficult for me since the war, but under the circumstances, yes." Emma studied him thoughtfully. "What changed? You've avoided town functions for years, from what I understand." "Many things," he replied after a pause. "Some I'm still discovering myself." His gaze met hers directly. "Would you consider attending with us? As Mother's companion officially, but..." He left the sentence unfinished, its implications hanging between them, an acknowledgement that their connection had evolved beyond mere professional association, but remained unnamed. "Yes," Emma said simply, "I would." Something eased in his posture, a tension releasing. "Thank you." He helped her down from the wagon with the same careful courtesy he always showed, though his hand lingered briefly against hers. "I'll see you tomorrow for the children's lesson." Emma watched him drive away, her thoughts in uncharacteristic disarray. In the space of a weekend, something fundamental had shifted. In her own perspective, in Nathan's carefully maintained isolation, and potentially in Willow Creek's delicate social balance. The coming Founders' Day celebration now loomed not merely as a community event, but as a public reckoning of sorts. Inside her cottage, Emma found evidence of a visitor during her absence. A large envelope had been pushed under her door, sealed, with the Winters family crest. Inside was a formally worded letter from Margaret Winters, informing her that the Founders' Day Committee had voted in her absence to proceed with the schoolhouse fire tableau, with Emma's participation respectfully requested as a matter of community remembrance. That the manipulation was skillfully executed. A committee vote she'd been unable to attend due to the ranch fire. A request that would be seen as obligation by the community. A public spectacle that would reinforce her identity as victim rather than educator. Emma set the letter aside, a calm determination replacing her initial dismay. Margaret Winters had overplayed her hand this time, mistaking circumstance for vulnerability. The woman who had emerged from Evergreen Ranch that morning was not the same one who had departed town yesterday. Not fearful of judgment, not desperate for acceptance, not willing to be defined by others' expectations. As Founders' Day approached, Willow Creek buzzed with preparation and anticipation. Businesses decorated their storefronts with bunting and historical displays. The town square was transformed with booths and a central platform for speeches, and households planned special meals for visiting friends and relatives. Beneath this festive surface, however, tensions simmered between the Hayes and Winters factions, with townsfolk increasingly forced to choose sides. Emma continued teaching the ranch children, finding purpose and joy in their progress despite the complicated adult world swirling around them. Nathan or Frank Miller still accompanied the wagon each session, though no further incidents had occurred since the pasture fire. During these brief interactions, Emma sensed a subtle change in Nathan's manner toward her. A warming, an opening, as though barriers carefully maintained for years were gradually lowering. 2 days before the celebration, Emma received another visitor. Dr. Wilson appeared at her garden gate late in the afternoon, his expression troubled. "Emma," he greeted her, declining her invitation to come inside, "I wanted to warn you. The tableau is proceeding as Margaret planned. She held another vote when several of your supporters were absent." "I received her letter," Emma confirmed, "though I haven't responded." The doctor studied her with concern. "You're planning to refuse?" "I'm planning to attend Founders' Day as Clara Hayes's companion," she replied steadily. "Beyond that, I've made no decisions." Dr. Wilson looked relieved, yet still worried. "Margaret won't take defiance lightly. She's invested considerable social capital in this event." "I understand the risks," Emma assured him. "But I've come to realize something important, Doctor. Scars mark survival, not definition. Whether from fire or war or life's other trials, they record what we've endured, not who we are entitled to become." "Well said," he responded with quiet approval. "Though philosophy provides cold comfort against practical attacks." "Perhaps," Emma acknowledged, "but it offers perspective worth defending." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.